All right.
All right. Welcome to the Domestic Draft Podcast. I'm Evan Bierman here with Dan Slowick. It's baseball season. We're gearing up for Cubs opening day later this month. We have Brett Taylor of Bleacher Nation joining us. But first, Dan, saw you sipping on a beer. What are you drinking, man?
Virgin American Gold limited release, celebrating their 6th-year anniversary up in Carlsbad, California, Carlsbad, North County. Again, a lot of breweries up there I've been talking about lately on the show, near where we got married. So you came out for that. So you were up over there in North County. But
Spot.
yeah, they turned 6 just this past year. So this is brand new. So they decided to release something that will be kind of good for generations to come. And that's just an American Gold premium lager. Just took the first sip. Very smooth, very easy. I think this is the trend that we're seeing a lot of breweries going into, is going back to something just pure and good, like a good Pilsner or a good lager, instead of all these like crazy variations that have been happening. But a pretty cool brewery, started by 3 high school friends here in San Diego who really just wanted to give back to the community and kind of hone in and highlight their love for the outdoors. So the name again is Bergen Beer Company. It kind of expresses their thirst to grow and to continue to be a part of their community. Give them a try. They're really good. I like this beer a lot. This is definitely something simple and easy for me to drink. Really enjoy it. What about you?
Nice. Yeah, and I was going to say I have a lighter beer as well. It's a Pilsner from Ravinia Brewing Company. They have a location in Logan Square in Chicago and a location in Highland Park, Illinois. They actually started out in 2017 in Highland Park, and then they opened the Logan Square location in 2021. It was Logan Square's 7th brewery at the time. I think there's now 10 or 11. But the Logan Square space has garage door windows facing Diversey to improve the building's airflow. Instead of booths, they have some swinging benches that are suspended by ropes. It's an industrial style space, really cool old bar that I believe they actually had moved into the space from another bar within Chicago. Several food options, an outdoor rooftop patio in the summertime. So it's a great little location there on Diversey. And they actually won their first medal at 2022's Great American Beer Festival as a bronze for their
Nice.
Diversey Station Juicy Session Pale Ale, which I've done on the show before. But what I have here is the Food Truck Pilsner. It's 4.9%, gets a 3.52 on Untapped. And it says here that it pairs well with nachos and lawn chairs. So I found it a fitting beer to sip on while we talk to our next guest, which is Brett Taylor. He's the lead writer, editor in chief at Bleacher Nation. He's a baseball writer for Bleacher Nation, a podcaster for The Athletic, and a helper at Obvious Shirts. You can find him on Twitter at Brett_A_Taylor. Thanks so much, Brett.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me. You made me just like unbelievably thirsty there at the start. All I have is it's a session water.
Yeah.
It's light, it's crisp.
Yeah,
Uh,
Got the Cubs logo, though.
yeah, it's still good.
it does have the Cubs logo. I'm a dork for all things Cubs, so.
Love it. Yeah, we'll talk about that as we go on the show. But first, I want to start with you and your career. Just doing a little research, saw you graduated from the Ohio State University in law. So I think the question there is, from law to baseball, how does that happen?
Yeah. So I was a lawyer for about 4 years, and I started doing Bleacher Nation just kind of on the side, something to, just fun project where the lawyer thing. I was at a large firm. You're reading and writing all day, not necessarily about things that you want to be reading and writing about, but you're developing these skills. And like, I'd like to spend some time actually reading and writing and analyzing things that I care about and have interest in. And so I was just doing Bleacher Nation thing kind of nights and weekends just for fun on the side. And I did that for a few years and got a little bit of a following, enough that when um, when the law firm life became, it was just not, I couldn't see myself doing it long
Mhm.
term, especially after we started to have kids. It was just not a life that was going to be consistent with kind of the dad I wanted to be, the life I wanted to have. And the site had gotten decently big enough that I was able to put together a PowerPoint to persuade my wife into letting me quit my lawyer job and do Bleacher Nation full time. And that was mid 2011. And so I have been running it full time since then, adding some folks and adding some different coverage. I'm still the main Cubs guy there, and then we actually got acquired by a larger company in December of last year. And so
Yeah,
now
congratulations.
yeah, thank you. So I am, I enjoyed the ride of building it, but it was sort of another point where I was ready to um, step back from the leadership part of it, doing, there's all kinds of stuff. I'm sure you guys know, doing a podcast, there's all kinds of stuff that's not forward facing that people
Yeah.
don't see, that you have to do and spend so much time on,
Put the hours in.
and worry about. And I was ready to just like, I just want to write about the Cubs and talk about the Cubs, and step back and do that. So that's, anyway, full circle. Now I'm back to that. I'm just straight up Cubs dude.
So has
Love
that
it.
been the biggest change since you guys got acquired then, is you can kind of step back and just write and
Yeah.
focus on the things that you love? Or what other kind of big changes have there been since you've been acquired?
Yeah. I mean, that is for me personally the main focus. I mean, it's anytime you go through this, there's a process to it. Like I'm still doing other stuff as we transition, and the other folks take on the mantle of things I was doing. But that's definitely going to be the big thing for me, is that then I can just spend more time doing Cub stuff. But probably the biggest change is that my partner, Michael Cerami, who
We've
became
had
a
him on
partner with me.
before.
Yeah, he became a partner with me about 6 years ago, and is just awesome writer, but even more than that, he's just extremely capable and competent at running a business like this. And it felt very natural for him to take over. And so a big part of the transition is, we're under the umbrella of this larger entity now, but Michael is the boss of Bleacher Nation. So I mean, he's now my boss, and he makes the decisions at BN, and helps steward the coverage there going forward. And I am excited that he has that opportunity. And also, I feel pretty lucky that it's I imagine a rare thing that you get to have been a partner with someone for a while and be their boss, and then flip, and now he's my boss. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah, that
figure
sounds extremely rare.
I figure he'll treat me pretty well. I was pretty nice to him for many years. So
There. Reciprocate it. Are we a big Justin Fields guy, being OSU alum? Are we all
oh
in?
God, yes.
He's the
Yes.
guy,
Oh
huh?
my gosh. Get that man some help. That is the thing. Yes. I don't even know what to say. Yes. So I mean, like, obviously I'm the Cubs guy at a professional level, and I'm a huge Cubs fan, crazy Cubs fan. I obsess about it. But like at an individual game level, I probably go a little more nuts, a little more screaming, a little more cursing at Bears games. I mean,
Everybody
there's only
does.
17 of them, so
Yeah.
Right.
you have to reserve some of that in the Cubs world for games 150 through 162.
Yeah. All right, quick Bears that talk then, real quick, before we talk some Cubs. What do you want them to do with the number 1 pick?
Yeah, I mean, the dream scenario is either one of two cases. It's trading down to 4, getting a huge haul from the Colts, and then Will Anderson is still on the board. Take Will Anderson, and you keep your haul and move from there. If either that's not going to be possible, or trade down to 2 with the Texans, and then you got someone at 9 or 13 that's like, oh, we making the crazy offer, 2 future first or whatever. I wouldn't hate that. I would hate to miss out on Anderson, because I do feel like he is a stud. But if you're setting it up where you're getting like 3 future firsts for multiple trade downs, boy, given the talent needs on this roster, it's
A lot
pretty
of
hard to
holes to
pass that
fill.
up.
A lot of holes to fill.
So I mean, really, I'm gonna say, like, the only outcome that would really disappoint me is just straight up drafting Anderson at number 1. So that's probably what will happen.
Okay, focusing back on baseball. I think today is the start of it. Briefly, we'll dive really heavy into Cubs, but really brief before we get into it. World Baseball Classic started today, I believe, right? Is this something that Major League Baseball likes? Do the club like it? Do you know anything on like a micro level, if the Cubs are someone who is kind of behind it and letting their players explore it? How is that impacting the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think you get different answers from different people, but I think you, even in the aggregate, probably get slightly different answers from like ownership level versus front offices, where they are necessarily just going to be worried about their players that go to play, especially big leaguers. I mean, I think even they would have different opinion among, like, okay, key big league personnel going to play, well, you worry about injury. Younger players, like Matt Mervis is going to play for Team Israel. The Cubs are thrilled about that. It's just sort of a different experience for him to face some high level competition. That's great. But Marcus Stroman going to pitch for Team Puerto Rico, he'll probably be fine, but God forbid he suffers an injury. But on the whole, I think Major League Baseball is very excited about it as a concept, because they want that international appeal. And I think if they're thinking about it the right way, like I think about it, you're really just trying to stoke interest in your sport generally, not even like bringing people to MLB specifically, but just make sure that generations to come dig baseball and are interested in it in different ways. And if that means getting different pockets of the world interested in it, great. If it means trying to put on a showcase that maybe some kids and their parents can watch together and have it and try to make it something, totally for that too. I think it'll be really interesting to follow in that spirit this year, because we haven't had it in so long. So I think it's going to, I'm really curious to see what the interest level, what the interest level is going to look like, because that last one, I don't know if you guys remember that, like the Adam Jones catch on the wall. And like, I mean, it was, I don't know. I watched, was that Dominican Republic, USA, that game? I forget what it was, but it was like a semifinal. It was semifinal. I watched it at a bar with some friends, and like people were into it.
It was fun.
It was like surprising how much people were into it. So I hope we get a little more of that this year.
Yeah, same. I would echo exactly what you said. It's great to see people like Mervis out there just get some competition. I'm curious though, with players like Sandy Alcantara or like Aces, throwing some innings already on those arms that might not be tuned up already. Before they're a couple weeks away from when the regular season starts. I don't know. Not that the Cubs really have
competitive innings too. It's like it's not even
high stress.
Like they're all ramping up in spring training, right? But you could tell a guy a million times, hey, take it easy. But if he's pitching with his country's name on his chest and he's in there trying to close it out or whatever,
definitely.
Yeah. All right, so let's go back to the Cubs, and before we get into them, I guess let's talk about the new rules that are the talk of the town on Twitter and just anytime anybody's talking about baseball right now, it's about the pitch clock. I feel like that's all I've heard from anyone. How is this impacting the game? Are you for it? Are you against it? Can you even have that opinion? Can anyone even have that opinion at this point, because it's here and it's happening? What are you seeing with the pitch clock?
Well, I can and do have that opinion. I actually was, I've been pretty pro pitch clock going back several years. Actually, I think originally, now, if people remember, pitch clock as a concept got floated as far back as 6 or 7 years ago. And it was actually designed at that time, or at least the talking point was, increasingly pitchers are having the advantage. They're throwing harder and harder, breaking pitches are moving more and more. The technology is helping them more and more. We need a way to balance the scales. So it was actually about the competitiveness of offense relative to pitching. Again, this is a long time ago. This is before they even implemented it in the minor leagues. I don't think pace of play was even a phrase that we used back then. That conversation died quickly. They changed the contours of the strike zone a little bit. The ball ended up getting juiced. And there were a lot of reasons why that part of it faded. And then you saw, as pitch clocks started getting implemented in various leagues in the minor leagues about 4 years ago, that's when the real focus was on pace of play. And that was when it really clicked for me, particularly following it in the minor leagues closely in terms of the reactions from fans, players, coaches, especially those who were vehemently opposed to it until they experienced it. And then they realized, it just makes for a much crisper experience. And well, let's bring it to what we've seen in spring training. And I think I wouldn't call it perfect implementation from my perspective, but I do think it's unquestionable to me, as you're watching a game, how much easier it is now to feel like you're really into the game, just constantly sort of plugged in. Whereas, you know, when the pitcher's taking 30 seconds out there,
Yeah.
when the batter is walking around, pacing around for no reason, this makes you sound like an old fuddy-duddy, but it's like, do we really need that? I
Yeah.
mean, why? What are we protecting, really? And so that's the part of it that I'm really digging. And I know that it's easy to focus on the fluky, freak, bad call stuff that happens.
Yeah.
They get circulated on Twitter, and I'll comment on them too. And there are mistakes being made. That's what spring training's for. But we got to keep in mind, when you see those things, that's one out of every 1,000 pitches where there's some weird thing happening.
Right.
Well, on those other 999 pitches, things are moving, things are working as they're supposed to, players are adjusting. So yeah, I've been very happy at how it has looked so far. And you'll notice one thing I didn't mention through all of my me grabbing the mic and just like talking this whole time is I didn't say anything about the length of the games. I understand that gets a lot of the attention. I do think that matters. Games had started to get too long if your goal is to be an entertainment product for as many people as possible. I think that's right. For me personally as a fan, I was less focused on length of game as an issue. Not because I want to watch a 4-hour game. It's just if I feel like I'm into the game, if I'm being held into the game, then I care a lot less about how long it is.
Yeah.
So for me, it's that just keep things moving, keep the game moving, and I'm in.
Yeah, I think everybody's talking about how much they're enjoying just the ball being in play more, like almost like natural baseball, pitch and catch. I'm curious the way you highlight it that, it's been in the minors for a little bit. I'm wondering, and typically whenever in a major league sport, there's a new rule, teams that adapt to it the quickest usually have success in the league as well. Is there any advantage to having a young team like the Cubs who are building their farm system coming up with these new rules? And do you know if any players on the roster currently are really well adapted already to it and are going to find success quicker than, say, a 15-year vet who's gotten used to the way the game's been played?
Love that question. Love that point, because I think you're spot on. I think the impact is neutered a little bit, and I'm going to get the number wrong, so you'll have to just sort of hear my broader point. But because the pitch clock has been in the minor leagues so long now, and because the nature of rosters are such that young players are pretty ubiquitous, especially in your bullpen where you're turning guys over and older guys are going down and coming up. I think it's something like 70% of players currently in the big leagues have had at least some experience in the minors with pitch clocks. So you're not looking at a huge pool of players that haven't. But at the margins, I don't think you're wrong. I think it probably does help to have as many guys as possible who've experienced all the quirks, all the weird things that might happen, to know the rules like down pat. They just instinctively know. I think that's going to help. I tend to think teams en masse will adjust pretty quickly, and so it'll be less. But all else equal, wouldn't you much rather your pitcher or hitter out there didn't even have to think because he's just so used to doing it? So yeah, I'm with you. I think I maybe I'm just hopeful because the Cubs
same.
The Cubs obviously do have a disproportionately younger roster right now.
You have the same opinion on the shift and that rule change, because it seems like, it's a great thought. You want more offense, but we're seeing teams already moving outfielders to just outside the grass, teams trying to get around this rule already. Is this, going to play out the way the league had intended?
Trying to like Bill Belichick, the shift rules.
Yeah, baseball teams will always do that, right?
Yeah.
I have lots of thoughts on that. So one, I think starting at the end, I would just say, if the precise contours of the rule get worked around too easily, they'll just change it. They'll just change the contours, right? I think the big miss was not doing the pie slice, which is, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but looks like a pie slice behind second base that basically creates a no man's land behind second base so that you can ensure that base hits up the middle are still base hits up the middle. I think if I had to bet on it, we're probably going to see the pie slice next year or maybe the year after that. I think there's going to be some buy-in on that. But it was probably just a little too dramatic at first to do at the big league level. But as far as shift limits, generally speaking, though, I am, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I've been banging that drum for years. I was way more in favor of that even than the pitch clock back in the day. But again, not necessarily for the reason that was espoused. I mean, a lot of what we've heard about is it kills BABIP. It's, it balls in play are just too easily being converted to outs, especially for big lefty sluggers, and so on and so on. And while that's true, I don't want people this year to get hung up on changes in BABIP, batting average on balls in play, to say, oh, the shift limits aren't working because BABIP only climbed by 3 points or whatever. See, it's not making a difference. Because I think that might happen. It might not be as dramatic as some people are expecting, but that's just a 1-year change. The point, in my mind, to limiting shifts in this way is to change the way teams think about and the way young developing players think about skill sets and values and what's important, what's not. And I think what we will see is over like a 5-year horizon, we will start to see some philosophical changes in organizations and players that do end up producing more batting average, basically. And that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for more hits. It's silly, stupid, old school, but it's true. We just want more hits. And I think if when we round up in 5 years, and I actually got a beer with me this time, we'll be saying, see, batting average, it did climb as
a plan.
Personnel changed.
Yeah, we're going to put you on the
because otherwise you're asking hitters, it's sort of the opposite shift problem. You can't realistically ask hitters to change who they are in a single year. Like, oh, you've been this style of hitter for your entire life. And people used to say it about the shift. They're like, just punch it the other way. Yeah, you punch a 98 cutter on the black.
Right.
Joey Gallo's not punching it the other way. Yeah.
So anyway, that's where I land on that. And I, as far as the thing that teams are trying, we saw it against Joey Gallo, take your left fielder, shift him over into that sort of pseudo second base position. I kind of hope we do see that a little bit, just because I kind of want to see how it plays out. I just want to see how it plays out. But I think that if it becomes too prevalent, I mean, Theo Epstein has said, he basically said that if teams start doing that a lot, then MLB does have under its authority to reevaluate. Change like, maybe we could limit that too. So I'm not basically, I'm just watching with interest how teams try to deal with the shift.
Definitely. To go into this roster that we have here now, and in your answers, I'm constantly thinking of the impact it might have with the new rules, the shifting, and just the way this roster has kind of been made up and the players in which they're signing. It seems to be an emphasis on defense and a cerebral player. And I'm curious at like how important it was for them to get catchers in Jan Gomes and Tucker Barnhart, who are going to be those coaches on the field and are going to be able to manage the pitching staff. Was that like priority number one to like solidify that with veterans for this team to kind of drive the ship?
100%. And the extent to which it will impact, rules changes and sort of that shorter term stuff probably won't hurt. But I think at a broader level, it's been clear to me in following the team closely for the last several years that for all the things that the Cubs liked about Wilson Contreras, that we all liked about Wilson Contreras, namely, he's like the second best offensive catcher in baseball. And that is a very valuable thing. But when it comes down to deciding what you're going to do with $18 million or whatever of your budget, the Cubs clearly have felt for a long time like they could better allocate those funds and instead make up just as much value, like total value, at the catching spot by relying on sort of these guys who fold more into the run prevention infrastructure and who sort of only think about their work with the pitchers as like their thing. And that isn't me saying that Wilson didn't care about that stuff and didn't try on that stuff and didn't, but there is a difference when you are as good of an offensive player as he is. There's a lot of your focus that has to go into that and sustaining that. And sort of, I think it's not even necessarily a criticism to say these other guys are just better at the game planning, the game calling, the working with pitchers, because that's what's become their focus. And he has other focuses. And clearly the Cardinals, who aren't idiots, valued him very highly. So it isn't a shot at him. It's just, these are the types of guys the Cubs have wanted at catcher. Clearly, I mean, it is crystal clear that these are the types that they wanted.
We're going to see a lot of young arms coming up, right? And so the pitch comm, I think you'll have the catchers that are able to kind of call those pitches then and let the pitcher know. I think, yeah, it's gonna help a lot having veterans back there with the young staff coming up.
I think that was a factor too, by the way, that the Cubs knew with how much pitching development is coming that they wanted to have the right guys. Yep.
Definitely. There is lots of speculation about the Cubs adding a bullpen arm, late inning arm. A lot of veteran names, Zach Britton, Mike Minor types. Are you hearing any front runners, any guys that we should be looking out for here?
Well, I mean, I think Zach Britton's the guy to keep an eye on, mostly because he's the biggest name because he's had so much success in his career. And his upside is so significant, even now at 35. The reason I would have him most on my radar in relation to the Cubs is because he fits the profile so well of guys that they've brought in the last 4 or 5 years with so much success. Guys who either had started to have a little bit of success in the big leagues, or maybe they were missing one thing, or they dealt with injury issues, or whatever, and then the Cubs can work with them and sort of on tap. Now he's a unique case because he had significant success in the big leagues, but he is coming off multiple injuries. He is a guy who does sort of that one weird thing. They love that. They love to find guys who do one weird thing, and then they can emphasize it. And for him, it's that he's got this just sort of uniquely powerful sinker that just has that extra bit of drop that I know, especially with this infield they've put together, they would love to have at the back of their bullpen if they could make it work. And so, and we know that they've scouted him. We know that he's on their radar. I think now it's just a question of cost, obviously, but also timing, because you've reached a point where I don't think he's coming to camp and being ramped up and opening with your team. And so you'd have to coordinate the right timing.
Yeah.
And that's what I would keep
he's got relationships with new face in the club too, Trey Mancini from days over there in Baltimore, right? So a lot of new faces. I keep asking myself this question. Besides, I guess you got to give it to Dansby. But if you were to ask somebody on the street right now, like, who's the face of the Chicago Cubs? There's so much turnover. Do you have an opinion of who that is? Is it wholeheartedly Dansby Swanson, or should it be somebody else?
If it's someone on the street, who they would probably say? They'd probably say David Ross. And you could say, good or bad, that's, he's the manager and he's done a perfectly fine job, but you probably don't want the manager to be the face of your team. I think you're right. If they're paying attention, they would say Dansby Swanson, because I think he wants that mantle, but also he got the big bucks and he's a very good player and he's going to be a shortstop and sort of a lowercase captain, maybe.
Ian Happ's been really
Ian Happ
in the community. Like it's a weird
Ian Happ,
team.
if you're like very into the Chicago world, you probably have come across some Ian Happ endorsed or attached product or service. And I think I think that's nice, by the way, that he has folded him, because it's not just like products and services, but it's also part of the community. And like that does tug at me a little bit when I think about the fact that he may be moving on after this year, free agent. And the Cubs have so many young outfielders coming up. Because I do like the idea of guys who really become part of the Chicago community and adopt it as their own. And it speaks in a way to your question. It's like, who's the face of this team? You want it to be somebody who's really good, been with the Cubs a long time, and feels like a part of the Chicago community. And it would have to be Ian Happ right now, but he might be the next guy on his way out.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, we briefly touched on Matt Mervis. There's going to be some other prospects throughout the year joining the club. What are your expectations, and what names do you expect to see making a big impact?
Oh my gosh, we are going to see so many prospects
It's
this year.
great. We're
I mean,
so
it's just,
excited. Like we
yeah,
felt like we did the road trip out in like what 2013 to spring training when we started to first like see the next wave, and like it kind of feels like we're almost there
Back.
again with
Yeah.
what we got going down there. So
it's like on the pitching side this time.
yeah,
It,
right,
it was
right,
all
right.
the positional guys back then. Yeah, I mean, I think the the crowding of the 40-man roster is going to make it interesting, because I think basically pick a prospect who's already on the 40-man. You're probably going to see him at some point this year, with the exceptions perhaps. Kevin Alcantara is a little too young, so he's not going to be. And obviously Alexander Canario is getting over multiple surgeries, so he's probably not. But other than that, I mean, you're going to see these guys coming up and down,
P-
getting the experience.
PCA. You think
Oh,
Pete Crow is going to
he's,
see some
but
time?
see, he speaks to the other point. So he's not on the 40-man yet. And so
Okay.
because of that, little harder to, he's kind of an exception, because if he's ready, if he shows he's ready at any point, you're
September?
making room.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? Let's talk about PCA. What's interesting is,
Let's do it.
so Michael Harris II with the Braves last
Braves.
year.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Same, the year before, same level as PCA, same profile as PCA, same relative success. Then he comes out the following year, kills it at AA, not just in his results, but scouts are looking at him and they're like, we think this guy could play in Major League Baseball right now. Opportunity happened to open up in the summer that the Braves had the need, and they're like, you know what the hell, let's just see what happens. He breaks out, wins Rookie of the Year. I would not rule that out entirely. You know, like I could imagine a scenario. I'm not saying this is likely. This is extraordinarily unlikely, but I'm just saying you could imagine a scenario where PCA starts at AA, continues his trajectory from last year, and then, God forbid, bad injury to Cody Bellinger or something, and the Cubs don't want to turn to Brennan Davis yet, for example. Maybe he's still reestablishing himself, and they say, what the heck, let's give PCA some run and see how it looks, and then go from there. I think it's unlikely, but it's not impossible, because I think they know, you know, he's a future big leaguer. It's not as if there are development questions on that side of things. It's really just a question of how good can he be. But so beyond that, though, I think we're going to see tons and tons of pitchers coming up and down. I think most of the names are known by now. But what I get really excited about is thinking about the random young guy who is going to be thrown in South Bend's bullpen, explodes. He's not on any of our radars, and we're like, oh my gosh, this guy's amazing. And then he boom up to AA, boom up to AAA, and boom to big leagues. That was Jeremiah Estrada last year. He was just barely coming back from injury last year, and he's pitching in high A at South Bend. Excuse me. And you know, we knew he was a decent prospect, but like for him to come out and do what he did and then reach the big leagues at the end of the year, that to me is just such an exciting story, that type of prospect development. And I think because of the strides the Cubs have made on the pitching side of things, I think that might become kind of an annual occurrence where we're going to have that every year. And so I'm excited to think about who that could be this year.
Out of those big name arms that we're familiar with, even in the opening starting lineup for the starting staff, who's got the highest ceiling? Who's an arm that we have where we're like, this is the guy, if it works out, this guy's going to be battling for Cy Youngs for years to come?
God, that's a fun
anybody
question.
Is there anybody?
Well, because so the reason I like that question so much is like Hayden Wesneski,
that guy's
it
dirty.
looks awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that he is no pitcher's a lock for anything, because health shit happens and whatever. Sorry, I don't know if I can say.
You're fine.
Yeah.
But I think he's as close as a lock you can be to being a good contributor at the big league level for many years. I don't know that his ceiling, if like everything goes right, I don't know that his ceiling is as high, again, if everything goes right, as someone like a Caleb Killian or a Ben Brown, guys who have that upper 90s fastball, super hard power. Curveball that Ben Brown has is gorgeous to watch. If he really can add a successful third pitch this year, I think he's going to catch a lot of people by surprise, because I just, because the Cubs have so many interesting pitching prospects, I don't think he's getting enough attention for being an actual like front of the rotation potential arm.
Mhm.
And then, Caleb Killian, I am finding fascinating this spring to follow, because most Cubs fans know he was the guy this time last year, had that front of the rotation potential, and decent first half at Iowa, comes up when he gets a chance. And I remember that first inning against the Cardinals. He looked so good. We're like,
Mhm.
yes, we
Mhm.
got a guy now. We got a guy. And then everything disintegrated from there, and he lost his mechanics, and his command was terrible. And he was pretty bad the rest of the way. And he kind of fell off for a lot of people. And we only just now find out he had a knee injury last year that was like just bad enough to cause problems, not quite bad enough to shut him down. He did end up getting a PRP injection later on to treat it. So we know it was not, this isn't them just making up,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
fudging it.
Yeah.
It was a real thing. And so then to see him pitch this spring and to look as good again as he did, he looked like the guy we saw the year before. I don't know. I want to make sure we keep him on the radar, because he has 4 quality pitches, and the build of a starter and the velocity of a front end starter.
He's got an awesome
I,
name too for a
I mean,
pitcher.
Caleb Killian, that doesn't
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
sound like a
It
number
sounds
2?
like an ace. Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
a great post type sleeper. We actually had Brian Smith on the show, and he was comparing him to Zach Wheeler. And I was just jacked up, had
That's
him on my
fun.
fantasy team, and
Love Zach Wheeler.
yeah, it all went downhill from there. Say I didn't win the championship in the fantasy league, but I thought he looked good. I thought he looked good at the beginning, and he's definitely somebody I'm going to be watching this year. Where does Christopher Morel fit in this team? And
Yeah.
second part of that question is, what's the biggest deficit of the roster? Like, what are they missing?
Yeah, those are probably not entirely unrelated questions, because the deficit's going to be somewhere on the positional side, and I think it's probably, I mean, you could pick a spot. You could say third base is just a big open question, because Morel's not getting any run over there this spring, which actually doesn't surprise me, because I know they want to give a lot of looks to Nick Madrigal, and Morel has always moved around, but I'm surprised we're not seeing more Morel over there, because we know he had throwing issues over there last year when he did get a lot of starts at third base. And I kind of was hoping he would get some in-game action to work on that, and not really happening. And so you could point to that pretty easily as a big question mark spot on the roster. But in a more aggregate sense, it's really just where that consistent above average offense is going to come from, especially with, say, Suzuki on the shelf. I could make an argument that Ian Happ might be the only other guy who's a lock to have to be an above average bat for sure. Like, we know Nico can do it. We know Dansby Swanson has done it, but they've also had times when they weren't.
Right.
And
Same
Cody
with
Bellinger's
right?
big
Yeah.
question mark. He could be great, or he could, kind of continue the
Last
trend.
2 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but circling back to Morel, I think because the Cubs have a pretty high density of utility types who don't have the same background that he does in terms of development, by which I mean came straight up from AA last year, hasn't really spent time at AAA. Now that they do have a little more depth, I could see the Cubs deciding, hey, this is a guy who has value to us long term. Let's make sure that the polish is there. Let's make sure that the development is there. And so if that's the tiebreaker for him, sort of, I even hate to call it getting squeezed off the roster, because it's less about his ability and more about the Cubs deciding, hey, we can get more value out of this guy by helping him develop. And so right now, if I had to guess, if there are no more injuries and whatever, I wouldn't be surprised to see Morel start the year at AAA.
Yeah.
And doesn't mean we wouldn't see him plenty this year. It's just that's where he'll start. Because I don't know, it seems like Cubs are really committed to giving Nick Madrigal this look at third base. And we know Wisdom's going to make the roster, and Edwin Rios is really showing out this spring, and the Cubs signed him for a reason. And even just with those 3 guys, you start to run low on spots, because you only got 4 on the bench after the backup catcher.
All right. Last question here. We're predicted to win 77 games. Let's get the fan base, the Cub fan base, excited here for this team. What are we going to enjoy watching this year? What are some things that may or may not happen? We're focusing on
Bold
defense.
predictions.
We got gold gloves around here. What are some bold predictions you have for this year?
Well, I think we're going to love watching the pitching. I think the Cubs have demonstrated, I think it's like each chunk of this is all coming together. The Cubs demonstrated many years ago that they understood something about optimizing the results of marginal pitchers in terms of run prevention. And the way this manifested itself is we would see it in the bullpen, where the Cubs would kind of gather a mishmash of guys, and then you'd look back at the end of the year and they had a top 10 bullpen. They did this for years and years and years. And then they started to get some even better talent in the bullpen. Then they finally started to percolate up some guys internally, 1 or 2 appearances in the rotation here and there. I think we're going to start seeing more of a wave of that. And I think we're going to see that they increasingly have that talent in place to match the infrastructure that they've built to get great success from guys. And so I think we're just going to see a number of surprisingly good pitching performances this year, where it's just like, wow, this guy's this good too. Oh, this guy's this good.
Been a while.
Yeah, it blows my mind to think back 5 years ago, when if you had one guy on the roster who was entirely homegrown and was contributing, that was a ton. That was, and now it's like the entire roster. And so digging that, I think the defense really will be as good as advertised. You know, it's sad. If you'd asked me this a few weeks ago, I would have said, I think Seiya Suzuki's going to have a monster season. And if he comes back fully healthy from the oblique, I still think there's so much potential there. That's what I want the great story to be, by the way, is for the Cubs to surprisingly have a slightly above average offense. I think if they somehow cobble together even a slightly above average offense, they're going to win 88 plus games. I think if they get that, because I think the pitching and defense will be that good. If the offense maybe is more like what we think it could be, which is maybe slightly below average, then you're starting to look at having to get some good bounces and good breaks to hit that 85, 86 win mark. But I think that's all. I think it's fair that all these predictions and all the betting lines and all of them are in that 76, 77 win range. It's fair. I get the reasons for it. Part of that's baking in another sell-off. But I just think mid 80s is very realistic. I really do. And that's when you're possibly in a playoff race. If you're trending toward that at the deadline, you become a buyer and maybe you win 88.
I love it. Cubs hoping to get some, mid 80 wins while throwing high 90s out of the new arms that we got on the staff. Brett Taylor, thanks so much for being here. He's the lead writer, editor-in-chief at Bleacher Nation. He writes for Bleacher Nation. He podcasts at The Athletic, and he also helps for Obvious Shirts. You could find him on Twitter at Brett_A_Taylor. Brett, thanks so much for being here tonight.
Thanks a lot, Brett.
Thanks so much, guys. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
All right. Again, that was Brett Taylor. He's the lead writer, editor-in-chief at Bleacher Nation. Go give him a follow on Twitter. He is at Brett, it's with 2 T's, _A_Taylor. All right, Dan, I got a fast fact before we get out of here.
Hit me with it.
Baseball, of course, but it's a Babe Ruth question. Against what opposing team did Babe Ruth hit his first career home run?
Chicago Cubs?
No, it's the New York Yankees. He was with the Red Sox at the time. This was back in 1915. Surprised you didn't do your homework on this before this podcast, but
playing against
there
milkmen.
It is. Yeah, Babe Ruth against the Yankees, first home run. All right, thanks again to our guest Brett Taylor for joining us today. For Dan Sloak, I'm Evan Bierman. You've been listening to the Domestic Draft Podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to rate the show. You can find us on Twitter at Domestic Draft, on Instagram at Domestic Draft Podcast. Our website is domesticdraft.com, and you can watch the show on YouTube. Just search up Domestic Draft and drop us a sub. Thanks again for listening. Cheers.
Cheers.